The jungle eats men quietly. There is no battle, no enemy you can see, just a green wall of trees and mud and standing water, and the slow drip of fever through a work camp. In the swamps of the narrow land between two oceans, the dying came in waves. A man would swing a pickaxe in the morning heat, shiver by nightfall, and bleed from the gums before the week was done. They buried the bodies in mass graves carved out of the rainforest, and they kept digging. By the time the French gave up, roughly 22,000 workers were dead. The man who ordered the digging was no fool. Ferdinand de Lesseps had already built the Suez Canal, slicing a path through the Egyptian desert and making himself the most celebrated engineer alive. He arrived in Panama, a hero. He believed the jungle would bow to him the way the desert had. The man who conquered Suez was about to be destroyed by a thin strip of mountain and disease, and he did not see it coming. You are watching Bedrock, where we dig into the stories of how this continent was built, the triumphs and the disasters baked into the ground beneath North America. Today is a story with two halves. First, the greatest engineering failure of the 19th century, a French catastrophe that swallowed lives and fortunes whole. Second, the American answer to it, a decade of grit that turned the deadliest construction site on Earth into one of the modern wonders of the world. And in between, the strange truth about what actually beat the jungle. It was not bigger machines. Stay with me, because the thing that finally cracked Panama open was so small you could swat it. To understand why Panama broke de Lesseps, you have to understand why everyone wanted it in the first place. Look at a map of the Americas. Two vast continents joined at a narrow waist, and at the narrowest point, a sliver of land, barely 50 miles wide, separating the Atlantic from the Pacific. For 400 years, sailors had dreamed of cutting through it. Without a canal, a ship leaving New York for San Francisco had to sail all the way down South America and around Cape Horn. A brutal voyage past freezing storms and shipwrecked coasts that ran roughly 14,000 miles. A canal at Panama would erase about 8,000 nautical miles from that journey. It would join two oceans and rewire global trade in a single stroke. The prize was almost beyond imagining. But here is the trap that fooled de Lesseps. He looked at Panama and saw another Suez. Suez had been flat, dry, desert, soft sand he could simply scoop away at sea level. Panama was the opposite of everything that had made him famous. It was mountains, dense rainforest, and rivers that flooded without warning. And it was crawling with diseases nobody yet understood. He brought the wrong map of the world in his head, and the jungle was waiting to correct him. The French began work in 1881, and de Lesseps made the decision that doomed the entire effort. He insisted on a sea-level canal, a flat ditch cut straight through the country with no locks, exactly like Suez. It was a fatal obsession. To reach sea level, his crews had to carve through the spine of a mountain range, and the deeper they cut, the more the earth fought back. The rainy season turned the slopes to liquid. Whole hillsides slid into the trench they had just dug, burying weeks of labor and the men who had done it. They would haul out the mud, and the next storm would pour it right back in. But the mudslides were not the real killer. The real killer hummed in the air at dusk. Mosquitoes bred in every pool of standing water across the camps, and they carried yellow fever and malaria. Nobody knew that yet. Doctors at the time blamed bad air and dirty habits. They even set the legs of hospital beds in bowls of water to keep ants away, which only bred more mosquitoes right beside the sick. By 1884, the death rate ran past 200 men a month. Hospital wards filled faster than the cemeteries could take them, and fresh recruits stepped off the ships, only to learn that surviving a full year was something close to a coin flip. At its peak, the French had roughly 40,000 laborers in the zone, most of them workers from the West Indies who came for the wages and found a death sentence in the swamp. Money vanished as fast as the workers did. De Lesseps had raised a fortune from ordinary French citizens, hundreds of thousands of small investors who trusted the hero of Suez with their savings. Every franc bought another stretch of ditch that the rain would erase and another row of graves in the trees. The jungle was eating all of it. You have to picture what defeat actually looked like, because it was total. By 1889, after 8 years of digging and dying, the company collapsed. A Paris court ordered it into liquidation. The money was simply gone, more than 1 billion francs raised from around 800,000 French families, and almost nothing to show for it but a half-dug ditch filling with rainwater and a graveyard in the trees. Then came the second blow, and this one struck at the heart of France itself. Investigators discovered that the dying company had bribed members of the French Parliament to hide how desperate things had become. The press tore it open. It became known as the Panama Scandal, and it brought down ministers and humiliated the nation that had given the world the Suez Canal. The hero was disgraced. The dream was abandoned. The rusting French machines were left to sink into the mud, swallowed by the same jungle that had beaten them. For more than a decade, Panama sat as a monument to human ambition, crushed, the place where the impossible had proven that it really was impossible. So, when a new player looked at that rotting ditch and said it could be finished, the world had every reason to laugh. Why would anyone walk into the grave that had buried France? That new player was the United States, and in 1904, it stepped into the wreck the French had left behind. Make no mistake about the gamble here. America was a rising industrial power, confident and hungry, but it was reaching for the exact project that had destroyed the most famous engineer on Earth. The skeptics were loud. The land had a reputation now. It had killed 22,000 men and bankrupted a nation, and the half-finished cut was already filling with jungle. There was a political shadow too, and it deserves an honest mention. To gain control of the canal route, the United States backed Panama's separation from Colombia in 1903, then signed a treaty with the new country to take charge of the zone. It was hardball power politics, and it is part of the story. But the work itself, the thing America actually had to do, was a problem of disease and earth and engineering on a scale the world had never attempted. The country was betting its reputation that it could solve a puzzle that had broken the best minds of Europe. And the first move the Americans made was not what anyone expected. They did not charge at the mountain. They went hunting for something far smaller. Because the first thing America fought in Panama was not the rock. It was a mosquito. In the years since the French failure, science had cracked the secret the French never had. Doctors had finally proven that mosquitoes carried yellow fever and malaria. The invisible enemy had a name and a body, and that changed everything. The man who took up that war was a United States Army doctor named William Gorgas. He had already wiped yellow fever out of Havana, and he arrived in Panama with a plan that sounded almost insane to the people paying for it. He wanted to drain the swamps, oil over every pool of standing water, screen the windows of every building, fumigate the towns, and hunt the breeding grounds across the entire zone. At first, the officials thought he was wasting money on bugs while the canal sat undug. He had to fight for every dollar. But Gorgas was right, and the proof came fast. By 1906, yellow fever had been driven out of the canal zone almost entirely. The disease that had killed in waves every wet season, the thing that had truly destroyed the French, was beaten by drained ditches and window screens, and relentless attention to detail. Before a single new mile of canal was finished, America had already won the battle the French never even understood they were fighting. With the death camps cleaned up, the Americans made the second decision that separated them from de Lesseps. They threw out his entire plan. Instead of clawing down to sea level and dying in the mudslides, the chief engineer, John Stevens, pushed a radical new design, and his successor, George Washington Goethals, drove it to the finish. The idea was to stop fighting the mountains and the river and use them instead. They dammed the wild Chagres River to create Gatun Lake, at the time the largest man-made lake on Earth, and they floated ships across the high country on that lake. To lift vessels up to the lake and lower them back down to the sea, they built giant locks, water elevators of concrete and steel that raised an ocean liner like it weighed nothing. Ships would no longer be dragged through a ditch. They would climb a staircase of water across the continent. And then there was the cut itself, the hardest dig on the planet, slicing through the mountain spine at a place called the Culebra Cut. The landslides that had buried the French still came, sometimes swallowing a whole day of progress in a single afternoon. But the Americans had giant steam shovels and a web of railroads hauling the spoil away day and night. They moved mountains of earth measured in the hundreds of millions of cubic yards, more dirt than any project in human history had ever shifted, dumping it to build the very dam that held back Gatun Lake. The dig that had been a tomb for the French became an assembly line. Goethals ran the whole zone like a machine, and he brought it home in 1914, well ahead of schedule. About a decade after they started, the canal opened, and a ship passed between the Atlantic and the Pacific, for the first time in history, lifted over a continent on a staircase of water. Now, step back and look at what really happened here, because it is easy to tell this story wrong. The lazy version says America simply had bigger machines and more money than France, that it outdug the jungle by brute force. That is not the truth. America did not outdig France. It outthought the problem. The French had thrown 40,000 men and $1 billion francs at Panama and lost because they were solving the wrong problem with the wrong design. They fought disease they did not understand, and they fought geography they refused to respect. The Americans won by changing the questions. Instead of asking how to dig faster, they asked what was actually killing the workers, and they answered it with a doctor and a swarm of drained ditches. Instead of asking how to force a flat canal through a mountain, they asked how to lift ships over it, and they answered with locks and a lake. The victory at Panama was a victory of clear thinking under pressure, of an era that believed any problem could be broken down and solved if you were honest about what the problem really was. That confidence, that refusal to accept that something was impossible just because the last people had died trying, is the thing worth remembering. And it is still there. Right now, as you watch this, ships are gliding through those same locks, climbing the water staircase that Goethals built more than 100 years ago. They are lifted into Gatun Lake, carried across the high jungle, and lowered gently back to the far ocean, a journey of a few hours that once meant 8,000 miles of open sea around Cape Horn. The machinery still works, the water still moves, but walk off the path into the green, and the other half of the story is there too. Out in the rainforest, along the old route, lie the graves, the thousands of men from France and the West Indies and a dozen other places who went into the ground so that those ships could pass. Every vessel that slides through the cut today is floating over their work and, in a sense, over their bones. The triumph and the grave are the same place. That is the part the brochures never tell you, and it is the part you cannot forget once you know it. So, here is what I keep coming back to. Panama was not just a canal. It was proof of a certain kind of national will. A moment when a country looked at the deadliest failure of the century and decided to finish it anyway, and pulled it off in 10 years. It is one of the most American things ever built, not because of the politics around it, but because of the sheer refusal to accept that something could not be done, which raises the real question. And I want your honest answer in the comments. Could any country pull this off today? Not the digging. We have far better machines now. I mean the will, the appetite to take on a project this dangerous, this expensive, and this slow, knowing it might take a decade and cost lives. Do we still build like that, or did we trade that nerve away for comfort? Tell me below, and tell me which side you land on. If stories like this, the ones buried in the ground we walk on, are the kind you want more of, follow Bedrock and stick around. There is a lot more of this continent left to dig up, and the next one might be hiding right under your feet.